Three children don't appear out of the desert by accident. Asterisk, not in this part of the territory. Not where the wind strips the land down to bone, and the sun punishes anything foolish enough to keep breathing after noon. Children showed up here only when something had gone terribly wrong. Asterisk Elias. Crow reined his horse to a stop and felt his throat tighten, before his mind caught up to what his eyes were seeing. Asterisk, they stood near a dry arroyo, half hidden by scrub and stone, like animals that had learned not to trust the shape of a man. One boy was no more than 10, his arm lifted protectively in front of two smaller figures, a girl clutching a rag doll with no face, and a younger boy whose legs trembled like he'd already decided the ground might give way beneath him. Asterisk dust caked their clothes. Their mouths were cracked. The smallest one's eyes were glassy, unfocused. Eli didn't move. Out here, hesitation could save your life or end someone else's. Asterisk, the desert was quiet in the way that made a man feel watched. No birds, no insects. Just a low sigh of wind slipping through dead grass. He slid a hand off the reins and raised it slowly, palm open, showing he carried no gun in it. Asterisk, it's all right, he said, voice rough from disuse. I ain't ridden past you. Asterisk, the older boy swallowed. His chin lifted, defiant despite the fear shaking his shoulders. Asterisk, please, the boy said. The word came out broken, like it had been carried too far without rest. Take us with you. Eli felt something give way in his chest. But let's go back to where it all started. Asterisk Elias? Crow had been alone a long time before the desert tested him like this. Asterisk. His ranch sat miles from the nearest town, a stretch of hard land and stubborn cattle carved out by a man who learned early that people left faster than the wind. His wife had died 6 winters. Back fever took her quiet in the night, and the house had never learned how to breathe again after that. Asterisk folks in town called him steady, quiet, a man who paid his debts and didn't linger. Asterisk. They didn't call him kind. Asterisk. Kindness was dangerous out here. It tied you to things that could be taken. Asterisk. That morning, Eli had ridden out early to check a broken fence line. The cattle had been spooked the night before something had moved through the valley. Something desperate enough to scatter. Animals that knew better than to run without reason. Asterisk. He'd followed the tracks until the sun climbed high, and the land turned unforgiving. Asterisk. That was when he saw them. Asterisk. Back in the present, the youngest child sagged to his knees. Asterisk. The girl made a small sound, not a cry, just a breath that trembled and grabbed the boy's shirt like he might disappear. Asterisk. Eli swung down from his horse. Asterisk. Up close, the smell of dust and old sweat hit him hard. The older boy's eyes tracked every movement, sharp and mistrustful. A protector forced into the role by loss. Asterisk. Where's your folks? Eli asked gently. The boy looked away. Gone, he said. There's nobody. The word nobody landed heavier than a confession. Eli glanced at the horizon. Town was half a day's ride back. He could take them there. Let the sheriff decide. Let the churchwomen cluck and whisper and find a place to put them that wouldn't be his problem. That was the sensible thing. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out his canteen, unscrewed the cap, and held it out. Asterisk. The older boy hesitated, then nodded once. He took a careful sip before passing it back, watching Eli the whole time. A man without a wife didn't take in children. Man alone didn't invite 3 fragile lives into a house that barely held together his own. Asterisk. Eli looked at the girl's bare feet, blistered and bleeding, at the way the smallest boy leaned against his sister, like she was the only wall left standing in the world. Asterisk. The wind shifted, carrying the distant echo of something else hooves, maybe, or just memory. Eli swallowed. "All right," he said quietly, more to himself than to them. "We'll get you out of this, son." Asterisk. The older boy's eyes widened, hope breaking through fear like light through cracked boards. Asterisk. Eli didn't know it yet, but as he lifted the smallest child into his arms, the desert behind them seemed to hold its breath. Asterisk. Because mercy, once chosen, never stays small for long. He thought about the warnings he'd heard in town as the ranch came into view. Asterisk. Children meant questions. Questions meant attention. And attention out here was rarely the good kind. Asterisk. Eli rode slow, letting the horse set the pace. The older boy, Jonah, he'd said his name, was sat straight-backed behind him, arms wrapped tight around the saddle horn like he was afraid to let go. The girl, Mary, slept against Eli's chest, her breath shallow but steady. The youngest, Thomas, was bundled in Eli's coat, eyes fluttering open and closed as if the world itself had grown too heavy. Asterisk. The house looked smaller than Eli remembered. Weathered boards, a sagging porch, a place built for one man and his ghosts, not 3 children who needed warmth and certainty. Asterisk. Eli dismounted and stood there a moment, listening. The land was calm. Too calm. Asterisk. Inside, the house smelled of dust and old coffee. Eli set Mary gently on the bed that still bore the shape of another life, then stoked the stove until the iron began to tick and warm. He poured water, tore bread with shaking hands, and watched as Jonah fed the younger 2 before touching anything himself. Asterisk. "You're safe here," Eli said at last. Asterisk. Jonah didn't answer. Safety was a word learned slowly. Asterisk. By evening, the children had eaten and slept, and the weight of what Eli had done finally settled into his bones. He stood at the window as the sun bled out over the prairie, wondering how a man could cross a line without realizing it had been there all along. Asterisk. The knock came just after dusk. Eli's hand went instinctively to the rifle by the door. When he opened it, he found Mrs. Calder standing on the porch, her shawl pulled tight, eyes sharp as fence wire. Behind her lingered 2 neighbors, men who smiled thin and watched everything. Asterisk. We saw your tracks, Mrs. Calder said without greeting. 3 sets too many for one man. Eli said nothing. Children, one of the men added. That true? They needed help, Eli replied. Mrs. Calder's mouth tightened. Help is one thing. Taking them in is another. Asterisk. They were alone. Asterisk. Lots of people are alone, she said. That don't make them yours. Asterisk. A small sound came from behind Eli, a floorboard creaking. Jonah stood in the doorway, trying to be invisible. Mrs. Calder noticed. Her gaze softened just a fraction. Then it hardened again. Asterisk. You don't know where they come from, she said. Who might be looking for them? Or why? Eli stepped slightly, blocking Jonah from view. I know what I saw, he said. And I know what I'd be if I rode past. Silence stretched. One of the men cleared his throat. Sheriff ought to hear about this. Eli nodded. Then he will. The neighbors left with uneasy glances, their footsteps fading into the dark. Eli closed the door and leaned against it, feeling the slow thud of his heart. That night he lay awake on the floor near the children's bed, listening to unfamiliar breathing fill his house. Responsibility pressed down on him like a hand between his shoulders. Morning brought dust on the horizon. By noon, the sheriff rode in. Sheriff Howe dismounted with the careful posture of a man weighing every word before speaking it. He looked at the children, then at Eli. You planning on keeping them? Holly asked. I am, Eli said. Holly sighed. You know that ain't simple. I know. They could belong to someone. Could be wanted back. They said there's nobody. Holly rubbed his jaw. Children say lots of things. Mary reached for Eli's hand without looking. He let her fingers wrap around his own. I only noticed that, too. I'll need time, the sheriff said finally. Questions will be asked. Eli nodded. That afternoon, whispers moved faster than cattle through dry grass. A woman alone in town spat near Eli's boots. Another pressed a loaf of bread into his hands without meeting his eyes. Mercy divided people. As dusk fell, Eli stood on the porch, watching the children chase fireflies in the fading light. Jonah laughed once short, surprised, like he didn't trust the sound. Eli felt the weight of unseen eyes on his back. Somewhere beyond the hills, decisions were being made that had nothing to do with kindness. He didn't know yet who would come asking for the children. Only that when they did, walking away would no longer be an option. The sound of hoofbeats reached the ranch before the riders did. Eli heard it while he was mending a broken latch, the rhythm wrong for cattle and too deliberate for wind. He didn't look up right away. Out here, a man learned that the moment you showed fear was the moment it learned your name. Jonah froze mid-step. His shoulders stiffened, eyes darting toward the open land beyond the fence. Inside, Eli said quietly. Mary grabbed Thomas's hand and pulled him toward the house, without a word. Jonah hesitated, then followed, though he stopped in the doorway, watching Eli like he might need to memorize him. The riders crested the low rise to the south, 3 of them, at first, silhouettes against a pale sky. Then 2 more appeared, spreading out, not in a hurry, not aggressive. That was what made Eli's stomach tighten. Men who came fast wanted answers. Men who came slow already had them. Eli rested a hand on the fence post and waited. They dismounted within speaking distance. Dust hung in the air, catching the light. The man in front wore a long coat despite the heat, his badge dulled by years of use. His eyes moved over the land, the house, the horse, and finally settled on Eli's face. Afternoon, the man said. Sheriff, Eli replied. This wasn't Hall. I'm Deputy Marshal Whitcomb, the man said. Riding out of San Miguel. Eli nodded once. What brings you this far west? Whitcomb's gaze slid to the house. 3 children. The words landed like a verdict. They wandered off a freight trail, Whitcomb continued. Or so we're told. Their names have been spoken in places you wouldn't care to visit. Eli didn't answer. Another man shifted behind Whitcomb, resting a hand too casually near his holster. Whitcomb smiled thinly. "I'm told you found them. I did. And you decided to keep them. They asked me to help." Whitcomb let out a breath, almost a laugh. "That's a dangerous habit." From the doorway, Jonah watched, jaw clenched so tight the muscles jumped beneath his skin. Whitcomb followed Eli's glance and raised his voice slightly. "Boy," he called. "Come here." Jonah didn't move. Eli stepped forward. "You can speak to me." Whitcomb's smile faded. "I can speak to whoever I like." The land seemed to go quiet around them, as if listening. Whitcomb dismounted fully now, boots crunching on gravel. "Their father was a wanted man," he said. "Stole horses. Shot a man in El Paso. Died in the desert with more debts than blood left in him." Eli felt Jonah's presence stiffen behind him. "The children aren't charged with anything," Whitcomb went on. "But there are people who believe they're owed, and people who don't want loose ends." Eli's voice stayed level. "They're children." "So was Cain," Whitcomb replied. The wind shifted. Somewhere far off, thunder muttered without promise of rain. Whitcomb tipped his head toward the house. "We'll take them now." "No," Eli said. The word came out softer than he expected. Firmer, too. Whitcomb studied him. "You refusing federal authority, Mr. Crow?" "I'm saying they're not going anywhere today." Silence stretched. One of the riders glanced toward the hills. Uneasy got *. "You know what happens to men who stand between the law and its business?" Whitcomb asked. Eli did. He thought of his wife's empty chair, of the nights the house breathed like it was waiting for someone who would never return, of 3 small bodies asleep under his roof, learning what warmth felt like again. "They can stay the night," Eli said. "You want answers, you get them proper. Sheriff Holly knows me." Whitcomb considered this. His eyes flicked once more to Jonah, who stood straighter now, like a boy pretending at being a man. "Tomorrow," Whitcomb said finally. "At first light." Eli nodded. The riders mounted and turned away, dust swallowing them slowly, like the land was deciding whether to forget they'd been there at all. That night. No one slept. Jonah sat at the table, hands clenched. "They'll take us," he said. Not a question. Eli poured water, set the cup down in front of him. "Not if I can help it." "You don't have to," Jonah said. "You could let them." Eli met his eyes. "I already chose." Outside, a distant glow flickered on the horizon campfires, maybe. Or men watching from far enough away to feel safe. Eli checked the rifle, then set it back where it belonged, untouched. Whatever was coming wouldn't be solved with a gun, and as the night deepened, the ranch stood caught between 2 kinds of justice, waiting for dawn to decide which one would speak first. Morning came thin and pale, like it hadn't slept either. The children sat close together at the table, bowls of porridge growing cold between their hands. No one spoke. Even the house seemed to hold itself still, every creak and breath restrained, as if noise alone might summon the riders back sooner. Eli stood at the sink, washing a cup that was already clean. His movements were slow, deliberate, not nervous, careful, the way a man moved when he knew. Every second mattered. Jonah finally broke the silence. "You don't have to lie for us," he said. His voice was steady, but his fingers twisted together beneath the table. "You don't owe us that." Eli turned. "I ain't lying." Jonah swallowed. "They said our father was bad." Eli didn't answer right away. Mary slid her bowl aside and climbed down from her chair. She walked to the small shelf near the stove and reached for something Eli hadn't realized she'd noticed before. A framed tintype, its edges worn smooth by time. Eli's breath caught. Mary carried it carefully to the table and set it down between them. Dot in the picture. A younger Eli stood beside a woman with soft eyes and a stubborn chin. Her hand rested on his arm like it belonged there. "Like it always would. She looks kind," Mary said. "She was," Eli replied. Jonah studied the photograph, then looked up. "Did someone take her away?" Eli nodded once. "Fever." Mary's mouth pressed into a thin line. She reached out, touching the corner of the frame. "I'm sorry." The words were small. They landed anyway. Jonah took a breath. "Our father wasn't always bad," he said. "He tried. When Ma died, he just kept making the wrong choices faster than he could fix them." Thomas leaned into Jonah's side, eyes half closed. Jonah rested his chin on the boy's hair. "He left us by the trail," Jonah continued. "Said he'd come back with food. He never did." Eli felt the room tighten around those words. "People think we're like him," Jonah said. "That it's in us." Eli walked to the table and sat down across from him. "Not looming, not distant. People think a lot of things," he said. "Most of 'em wrong." Outside a horse snorted. Jonah stiffened. Eli raised a hand, palm down. "Stay." Bootsteps crunched on gravel. A single set this time. Sheriff Hall knocked once and waited. Eli opened the door. Holly stood there without his hat, lines deeper in his face than yesterday. "They're back," Holly said quietly. "Whitcomb and his men. Waiting by the ridge." Eli nodded. "Then it's time." Holly glanced past him at the children. "You sure about this?" Eli looked back once. Mary's eyes met his. She didn't speak. She didn't beg. That was what decided it. Out by the fence line, Whitcomb stood with his rider's arms folded, patience wearing thin. The air felt heavy, charged with something just short of violence. Jonah stepped forward before Eli could stop him. "My pa's sins ain't mine," the boy said. His voice carried farther than it should have. "If the law's just, it knows that." Whitcomb raised a brow. "That so?" Eli placed a hand on Jonah's shoulder. "He speaks true." Whitcomb's gaze hardened. "You planning on making a sermon out of this?" Holly cleared his throat. "I've spoken with the town. There are families willing to take them in." Mary shook her head, barely noticeable. Her fingers curled into Eli's coat. Eli felt it. Chose to acknowledge it. "They stay here," Eli said. "With me." Whitcomb laughed, short and sharp. "A widowed rancher raising 3 children tied to a criminal? You think that ends clean?" Eli didn't raise his voice. "No, I think it ends honest." Silence followed. Long enough for the wind to move through the grass and for the riders to exchange uneasy looks. Jonah lifted his chin. "If you take us," he said, "you'll just be proving you don't care what we become. Only what we came from." Whitcomb studied the boy. For the first time, something like doubt crossed his face. Hollis stepped forward. "The law can protect them here," he said. "Under my watch." "Under Eli's name." Whitcomb exhaled slowly. "You're asking me to trust kindness over order." "I'm asking you to remember the difference," Holly replied. The prairie held its breath. Whitcomb turned, scanning the land, the house, the children standing behind a man who had chosen them without being asked. Finally, he nodded once. "They stay," he said. "For now." I didn't move until the riders turned away." Mary's fingers tightened around his sleeve. For the first time since the desert, she smiled. Years later, people would argue about when the change truly began. Some said it was the day the marshal rode away without the children. Others said it was slower than that, built in quiet mornings, and scraped knees tended without complaint, and names spoken with care instead of suspicion. Eli never bothered correcting them. The ranch changed first. Small. Boots joined his outside the door. Laughter awkward at first, then free found its way into the walls. Jonah grew tall and strong, learning the land not as something to fear, but something that could be worked and respected. Mary learned how to read by lamplight, her voice soft and steady as she traced letters Eli had never needed before. Thomas followed Eli everywhere, his hand always reaching, always trusting. Town watched. Some waited for trouble. Others softened without admitting it. Mrs. Calder brought pie one afternoon and stayed just long enough to see Mary kiss Eli's cheek before running off. She never mentioned it again. The law came by now and then. Always polite, always careful. Whitcomb never returned. One autumn morning, Eli stood at the fence line. Older now, hands rougher, watching Jonah saddle a horse with practiced ease. Mary packed supplies for town. Thomas argued with the dog about who got the warmest spot in the sun. Eli felt something settle in his chest that had been restless for years. Peace didn't arrive loud. It arrived like this. Later that evening, as the sky burned gold and red, Jonah approached Eli, hat in hand. "You ever regret it?" Jonah asked. Eli considered the question, thought of the desert. The moment he'd stopped riding, "No," he said. "I regret the years I didn't know I could choose different." Jonah nodded. "I won't forget that." Mary joined them, slipping her arm through Eli's. "Neither will we." As night fell, the house filled with light and voices, steady and sure. Out beyond the ranch, the desert remained what it had always been: harsh, unforgiving, honest. But inside those walls, 3 children who had once begged for mercy learned what it meant to belong, and a man who thought he'd buried his heart discovered it had only been waiting to be found.